After a very difficult start to the season, Chris Boucher changed his approach to basketball and became a decently important role player for the Raptors near the end of the season and for the playoffs. But now as a free agent, the Raptors must decide how much money they're willing to give him to bring him back to the team. So in today's video, we need to figure out and discuss how much money is Chris Boucher actually worth. Let's get into it. What's going on, Raptors fans? It's Jacob here, back with Amateur Hour Sports for another Toronto Raptors YouTube video. On this channel, we give you the greatest coverage and analysis on the latest Toronto Raptors news, and I'm going to be doing it all throughout the offseason. So if you like what you see from today's video and you are new to the channel, then make sure you are subscribed. We just hit 9,000 subs. We're on a road to 10,000. Now that we've hit that milestone, can't wait to get there. You can help us along, and also don't be afraid to drop a like on the video if you do enjoy what you see. But our content for today, we're discussing Chris Boucher and his worth in free agency, because near the end of the season, there was some good things that Chris Boucher did. He became the real energy guy for this Toronto Raptors team who desperately needed some help off of their bench. We were kind of expecting earlier on in the season Chris Boucher to provide a lot of that bench scoring, just like he did in the Tampa season in 2020-2021, but it was just a different Chris Boucher that we got, and we were just wondering what had happened to him. And I mean, I was super critical of Chris Boucher, and I don't regret being super critical of him, because it was at the point earlier on in the season where it was literally doing more harm than good having him on the floor. Like, him playing at all was a detriment to the Toronto Raptors and what they were trying to do in winning basketball games. But things really started to change around mid-season. He understood that, maybe his skill set alone wasn't going to make him a survivor in the NBA. He needed to be that energy guy. He needed to be the guy coming off the bench who worked harder than everybody else on the floor. He was getting rebounds, and maybe when the scoring wasn't happening, still making an impact on the glass and still making an impact on defense. I mean, earlier on the season, his defense was just diabolical. The amount of times he just jumps on pump fakes, he can't guard his guy in the paint, it was ridiculous. Now, still, the pump fakes kind of bother me. They're not nearly as bad as they were before. A lot of things had shifted. Like, he really shifted his game and became an important part of the Raptors winning 48 games, and a very important part of the Raptors winning 2 playoff games. Like, he was pretty good in the playoffs. I would say he was great in the playoffs. So we need to discuss now, how much is it worth to bring him back to the team? And I've said earlier, the Raptors, our bench, we had a lot of problems with this season. I think the Raptors have a very, very good starting 5. The bench just isn't quite there to supplement it. And Chris Boucher, especially near the end of the season, was one of the bright spots off of our bench. So it seems like it is pretty important to bring him back to the team. And guys like Masai Ujiri, the Raptors president, would agree. At the end of every season, Masai Ujiri has his press conference where he talks about the season, talks about the plans ahead. And then when he's talking about the plans ahead, whenever the conversation came about Chris Boucher, not that they asked about his contract, Masai Ujiri was speaking as if Chris Boucher was still on contract. The reality is Chris Boucher is a free agent. He can choose wherever he wants to go, and I'm sure there's going to be a decent amount of interest from other teams. I think his skill set does cater towards, honestly, it does cater towards these teams who want to contend, because, as we see in the playoffs right now, a lot of the times later in games, it shifts towards not having a true big on the floor. So having a stretch big like Chris Boucher could make a lot of sense for these teams. But Masai Ujiri continuously speaks as though Chris Boucher is just still on the team. There's not going to be any problems. Like, he didn't even bring up the fact that they had to give Chris Boucher a new contract. It was an operating as if he is still on the team. So that's interesting to me. And it does showcase to me that Masai Ujiri treats Chris Boucher maybe not necessarily as a priority, but certainly somebody that he needs to bring back to this team. But just how much money is he willing to dish out in order to make that happen? Going on to his stats from last season, they were decent. They were decent, especially considering the fact that earlier on in the season, he struggled so much. He averaged over 9 points per game, just over 6 rebounds per game, just under 1 block per game. Efficiency-wise, I mean, he does take a lot of shots, but 46% of the field, that's not bad. Just under 30% from 3. Feel like we can get that a little bit higher, and from the free throw, 77%. Now, this is decent, especially for a role player. This guy's making like $7 million right now, Chris Boucher, so considering the contract he's on, that's pretty good value, I would say. But it's a bit of a sharp contrast to what we saw in the Tampa season, in the 2020-2021 season, where he was honestly getting himself into some conversations for 6th man of the year. Maybe not realistic conversations, but kind of filtering his name within those conversations. Like, he was in there. People were discussing it. And this is why, because his stats of this season were very, very good. 13.6 points per game, 1 assist, 6.7 rebounds, almost 2 blocks per game. well above 50% shooting from the field and 38% shooting from three. Now, I will admit, this is playing well above his contract value. And at the time, that was one of the best value contracts in the NBA. Like, Chris Boucher was playing out of his mind in that Tampa season. And it was just so weird. I mean, such a contrast the start of this season compared to last season. So we do have to go off what we saw this season. And even though he finished the season a lot better than he started it, we still do have to factor in the struggles from earlier on in the season. Because the reality is, unless Chris Boucher is like the hardest worker on the floor, there is certainly a limit to what he can produce from a basketball skill standpoint. Now, I'm not trying to slight him. I'm just trying to be realistic here. Like, if he's not the hardest worker, there's a limit to what he can achieve on the floor with the Raptors. We have to recognize that. Now, can Chris Boucher go out there and be the energy guy every game, be the hardest working guy or one of the hardest working guys on the floor every game? It's certainly possible, but Chris Boucher, now 29 years old, going to be 30 years old in January. There's a lot of factors that we have to consider in this discussion. So for a guy, I feel like energy guys, I was kind of thinking before I recorded this, like, sure, they seem like they're easy to get, just bringing a guy who's going to work very hard, but Chris Boucher is a lot better than some of these other energy guys in the league. And I mean, if it was so easy to get somebody like that, every team would have the energy guy. They just don't have it. Chris Boucher does provide us a good service when he does that. I think he's due for a little bit of a raise. I think he's due for that. But I think we should be hovering based on the skill set, based on what we can expect from him, based on the age. You should not be going above $11 million. Like, that is your absolute max for Chris Boucher. You cannot be going above $11 million. I would say, ideally, for his value, I would like to get maybe in the high 9 million category, from 9.5 million to 10 million. I wouldn't be afraid to go maybe low 10s, like maybe, 10.1, 10.2. Probably not happy to go above $10.5 million a year. The reality is, like, how much can you really rely on him with this money? I think Chris Boucher is in to have next season a similar season to what he had this season. We knew he wasn't going to be as good this season as he was in the previous season, that Tampa season, but still, there was a bit of a decline for what we were expecting from Chris Boucher. Sure, that fixed itself a lot late in the season, and sure, there was that playoff game where he was just loading up on points, but that's a pretty rare sight to see for Chris Boucher. We have to consider the fact that there are some games where, he can get 13 rebounds, but he can also go 1 for 7 from the field. So there certainly is a role with this team, and I think Chris Boucher, for me, would be in my 9-man rotation for next season. So in considering that, yeah, I do believe it is necessary to bring him back, but I also believe it's necessary to look after your team and think about, if he's asking for a ton of money, how much are you really going to miss him? Is it going to be that difficult to replace him? I don't think that's the case, but I still would like to bring him back. I still think he is an important part of this team, and recognizing that, I think that it is justified to give him around, between 9.5 and 10.5 million dollars. I honestly would be a little bit upset if we went above $11 million. And again, that's not a knock on him, but basketball is a business. It's a really weird time when a player is a free agent, because you have to convince the player that, you want to play that guy to play the best for your team. You have to convince him why he's not good enough for the money that he's asking for. And the player, in a weird dynamic, has to convince the team that employed him last year that, he's worth all this money. It's a very weird dynamic, because once that contract signed, the team that was talking about all the bad things about your game and why they need to take down the amount of money you're asking for, all of a sudden is trying to work on your game and make you better. Maybe you lose a little bit of motivation. It's a weird situation when you're signing a new contract for a team. But I would say, the skill set Chris Boucher has does fit very well with the system the Raptors want to use. If Chris Boucher were to go to another team, I feel like his skill set wouldn't be utilized as effectively, and I think he would struggle a lot more on any other team but the Toronto Raptors. I could be wrong in that, but I just feel like his skill set is made for the way the Toronto Raptors played last season and the way they want to play this season. So I think it would be within the best interest of the team, but I also think it would be within the best interest of the player, Chris Boucher, to stay in Toronto. And, the final factor why he should stay in Toronto from a personal standpoint is, he's been getting a lot of endorsement deals. He's with Mary Brown's, he's with Slim Jim. Like, he's getting a lot of good endorsement deals out of this, being Canadian playing in Toronto. Does he get these sort of deals playing for other teams? I don't think so. Maybe, like, if he's got a really good agent or something, but I feel like a lot of these deals are coming up for him because he's playing as a Canadian in a Canadian market, and Canadian Toronto fans we like Chris Boucher. We want him to succeed. So, I think there's a lot of factors for the Raptors to keep him and for Chris Boucher to stay here. But ultimately, the price needs to be right. And for the price to be right for me, we need to be looking in the $10 million range. Nothing above 11. If we can go under 10, that is very, very good value for me. And I realize at this point I haven't actually mentioned the length of this. I would say, for a guy about to turn 30 years old, I would go for maybe 2 years plus a team option, give you a little bit of flexibility. Also, it kind of locks him in for those 2 years. Like maybe he feels a little bit comfortable with that time length. But I think a 2+1, I would even consider going just a straight up 3-year contract. Nothing more than that for me makes sense for Chris Boucher. But that's my say on Chris Boucher. What's your say? How much money do you think Chris Boucher is worth? What length of contract would you give him? I want to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, because that is it for today's video. Please drop a like on the video if you did enjoy. It goes a long way to supporting the channel, helping us reach some new viewers. And if you are one of those new viewers checking out the channel for the first time, or maybe there's got to be a lot of you out there just watching videos who aren't actually subscribed to the channel, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're going to be giving you great Raptors content all throughout the season. When you subscribe, YouTube is more likely to recommend this video on your homepage, so you're not going to miss out on these videos. And consider hitting the bell as well, so even when you are subscribed, you're never going to miss an AmateurHour Sports drop. And we'll see you again next time for another video.